everyone is trying to limit the pain they feel. If you're self-aware, you come to a relationship, you're not looking for someone else to fulfill something within you that they were never meant to fulfill. Great relationships actually think about the other person greater than themselves. What can I give to that person? Every person has issues, and every person will bring those issues into a relationship. I think a willingness to sacrifice for one another, to think the best of one another, until there's evidence that tells you something different. What can I give, not what can I get?
Welcome back to another episode of the New Rules Podcast. It's your girl, Breezy. How are you doing today?
I am well. Another day.
I'm here with the wonderful, incredible Adrian Crawford.
Glad
it's just
to
an
be
honor
here.
to be in your presence.
Whatever.
Every day I have this humble honor.
Wow.
I don't take it for granted.
Yes, you do. But anyway.
Oh my God.
Yes, you do. Yes, you absolutely do. Bree, what's been happening? How you been?
All good things. I feel like we've been running with the wind against our backs, as you say, and it's been fun. It
has been fun. A lot of momentum, a lot of things been happening. So yeah, it's a whenever that happens, it's a busy season, but it's always, it's a good busy to have.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah. So Bree, what we got today?
Today we're going to talk about authentic relationships.
Oh boy, we're in February. Here we go, love season.
Oh yes, we're going to talk about relationships in a lot of different.
Okay.
We have many different kinds of relationships.
Gotcha.
So we're going to talk about all of those.
Yep.
I think relationships is one of those things that's just like, from my perspective, just this lifelong burden. Enjoy. It's like you will never stop wrestling with your friendships, your working relationships, your romantic relationships. Like that will just never end.
No.
And that's just one of the most, the hardest, but one of the most glorious things about our lives.
Yeah, I would agree. I believe human beings were meant to be in relationships, but most of the times we're never taught how to do them well, and they're difficult. And so what we end up doing a lot of times is just most of our relationships are just kind of learned many times off of bad habits and things we may see or things we've heard or things we've experienced. And we just go through it, and a lot of times they're not the moments are really high, the moments are really low, but very few times we actually learn how to do it well. So hopefully today we can actually help people, give them a little bit of insight, a little bit of wisdom on actually how to do relationships well, because they are going to be tough. But I actually believe some of the tough things we deal with in relationships can be things that can be avoided, or I shouldn't say avoided, or things you should expect. I think a lot of times we expect everything in a relationship to be up and to the right. We expect everything to be just all good. Man, we're looking for just the bliss of relationships, but that's not how it always works.
Yeah, and I think because of that, we're very ill-equipped to manage our relationships and how we show up whenever we're in a conflict with someone and all of the different things. Like, it's just not something that we've been taught. Like,
no,
we don't learn about that in school.
No, you don't learn about that in school. And here's the thing, we don't actually learn how to well manage ourselves. Right. So if you can't, we talked a lot about here on being authentic and that self-awareness and resilience to remain self-aware. So if we don't do that well, then you add another person in there who probably doesn't do that well, which means you're just going to have a cluster a lot of times when it comes to relationships.
Yep. So in your opinion, what are, I guess, the key building blocks to having authentic relationships? Yeah,
I think the first key is is self-awareness. And again, I know it sounds like a broken record. And here's what I mean. I mean, individually having self-awareness. Because I think if you're self-aware, which means you can have a greater sense of self, you come to a relationship and you're not looking for someone else to fulfill something within you that they were never meant to fulfill. And so I think that's incredibly important. I think the second thing in a great relationships actually think about the other person greater than themselves. That when you go in there and you go into a relationship saying, man, what can I give to that person? and what can that person, and that person's doing the same thing, I think you end up having really good relationship. I think the third thing in a building block in relationship is proper expectations. I think it's when you go in there, a lot of times we go into relationships, whether it's business relationships, romantic relationships, work relationships, friendships. We will want those that we'll have think about the greatest expectation or the best relationship you can ever think of. We think every relationship is going to be that way, and it's usually not. So I think we have false expectations going in there, which then the chasm's created, and that's when people get disillusioned in that. So I think those three things are kind of the top three on my mind that I feel like are incredibly important in building a healthy relationship.
How well do you think that we need to understand ourselves in order to have functioning relationships?
I think that's one of the most critical things, because what we end up doing, especially here in America, is that we end up, relationships have become incredibly transactional. They become things to where it's what I can get from someone else. And a lot of times the things that we're trying to get from someone else is because we're not fully okay with who we are. And so we look for somebody else to fulfill that void. So an example would be if you grew up and you never, were never ever really encouraged, right? You were never, your parents, people were just, parents, coaches, just constantly beat you down, things like that. What will happen is two things, I believe, in a relationship. One, you then will expect a person to always do that for you. If it's a friend, a romantic interest, your boss, because they'll ask you to do things that your parents didn't do for you. On the other side, what will happen, some people go to the other side, and that when people actually do that for you, you question everything about their motive because it's weird to you. And so then you end up pushing them away because it feels, well, this isn't going to last because no one ever does this for me. No one who loved me actually encourages me. I'm using encouragement. It can be so many other things. And so when you don't realize that that's an issue going on, you'll function out of whichever side of that in a broken way. You'll also know you'll start to function out of when you're not aware that times when you're leading or you're entering a relationship out of your anxiety, out of your fear or whatever it is. And so being aware of that. Another thing is being aware of your strengths, knowing what I actually bring to a relationship, because that helps you. Because if I know, I'm an encourager, be that in a relationship. And if you know that, for you, you're a very trustworthy person. Being able to know that about yourself. So that's what you lead to in a relationship. That's one of the things that you lean into in your relationships. And so I think when you're aware, it allows you to be the very best version of yourself. And when you're doing that, it actually just makes relationships better.
To even have relationships, you first have to start off with some fostering of connection, even if it's little. This is going to sound like the silliest question, most basic question ever. But I feel like we've lost the art of talking to people.
Oh, 100%.
We just don't. And I say this as myself. I don't really, in some ways, feel like I really understand how to do that.
Yeah.
And so as someone who, a lot of times you're perceived as this big caricature, and that's not who you are at all. Whenever we're at parties or events or even dinners, you're kind of just just over here to the side, unless you know them very well.
Yep. So
how do you think that you developed your ability to just connect with people? Because you can do it really fast and really naturally.
I think that a little bit was, I have to say, my upbringing, because I moved a lot. So remember, I always say this, and sometimes in your greatest places of pain, you find your greatest sense of purpose, and also you find some of your greatest skills there. Moving was very painful for me. My father was, you've heard me say before, a college basketball coach, so we lived in a lot of different places as my father was moving forward in his career. So what I had to learn very fast is moving, and we weren't just moving from from across the city to a new home. You know what I mean? We were moving like hundreds of miles, right? So I was coming into a new environment. I mean, going from the South to the Midwest, then back to the South, and then going up north, then going farther to the Midwest. Midwest. I mean, it was just a lot of different environments. So I had to learn how to survive. So what you start to do is you begin to, you can read rooms well. You go in there, you see who are the power players in your elementary school. You're trying to see who are the smart kids, who are the people, who are the cool kids, who are the people who had juice in the school, who are the people you need to kind of be cool with, who are the people you need to stay away from. You just had to do that for survival. So I think for me, I'm very observant when I walk into a place. And so I can kind of see. The other thing that I do in learning how to communicate, I just it really is it is listening. Because as I let people just start to talk or I just hear something, I can really pick up very fast what something they're interested in. And normally because I've been well traveled, I've been around all different types of people, I usually can find some level of common ground. That's why if I'm sitting with a kid who plays Dungeons and Dragons, right? And you say, hey, a 45-year-old black man, I can talk to him about Dungeons and Dragons because I had friends who played Dungeons and Dragons and I would play with them, so I could do that. Or if somebody, wants to talk about hip hop, I can easily do that. Somebody wants to talk about, sports. Oh, I can jump in that. You want to talk about politics and, world affairs. So I'm kind of well-rounded in being able to talk about that at some level, have enough knowledge about it. And so I just try to find what people are interested in and I'll just ask them questions. That would probably be the biggest thing. If you're not a great communicator, the biggest thing you do is just ask questions. People love themselves.
Yeah, they just want you to be interested in
They
them.
want you, people, we always say, people love them. So just let them talk. And you don't have to do a ton of talking. You can just ask. So just be prepared, listen, and just oh, well, tell me about that. Oh, that's interesting. Well, what about this? Oh, if you have a little bit of knowledge about it, then you throw something out there that they're going to find interesting about it. They're going to be like, oh, really? Man, well, tell me about your first experience with this. And they just talk and people then, they're going to be more adept to wanting to know you. They're going to be more closer to you because, man, you've shown interest in them first.
Hmm. So as a kid, you were pretty emotional and pretty self-critical.
Yep.
So especially moving around, how did you, I guess, fight the anxieties and the fears of how you would be perceived when trying to pursue relationships with people, whether that be, friendships, romantically, in a new place?
Yeah. Now, what I would say is that being a pretty good athlete actually helped me because I was able to just naturally connect with kids because, in my first neighborhood that I remember, but my first neighborhood really in very formative years is in Knoxville, Tennessee. And we lived in a typical 80s suburban neighborhood. Hundreds of homes were in there. And so tons of kids. And I'll never forget a friend of mine, it was Andy Uglow. And Andy lived right down the street from me. And I think I was I may have saw him. What it was that we were going to school. So I had to take the bus to school. And so I saw him get on the bus. I got on the bus. And we went to school together, and we were like, oh, and he was in one of my classes. So I'm like, oh, and then we got off the bus together. You're like, oh, hey man, and then back in the day, people just played outside. He was like, yeah, man, I think we're gonna maybe play basketball a little bit later, if you want to come down. So he just invited me, and I'll never forget that. So I'm like, okay. So I would go, but I knew I was good enough in basketball and so when you're good at something, then you're like, oh, okay. So then I was able to go in, and then from there, it just kind of became a relationship. So I always was still insecure about certain things, but I think I tried to find something that I could do. And so a lot of times playing outside, sports, things like that kind of connected me with people. And that allowed me to actually build relationships with the group of people I ultimately ended up being friends with.
That's a really good point because as you're saying that, I was thinking about how whenever I was first going into high school was whenever I started doing competitive cheer.
Yep.
And so immediately when I went into high school, I already had 30 people that I was already practicing with who all lived on different parts of town, who were all in different grades, who it was they didn't have to like me to have my back.
Yeah.
And so I kind of had the built-in community in one of the, most challenging adolescent times to build community.
Yep.
That's the thing about church too.
Yep.
In communities of that nature where it's oh, I don't know what to do. I'm just gonna go to church
Yeah.
and maybe I'll find some friends.
No, and I think that's I think that's has been lost. I know that Scott Galloway has done a lot of research on that, and he's talking about he's coming out with a book pretty soon about men and really the epidemic of loneliness with men and really the lack of raising up men in today's generation. And one of the things he talks about is that actual the lack of people being a part of church, and he's and I think he's more agnostic, atheist or something like that. But he talks about church. He talks about like people going to like they used to have like those, the elk lodges. I always used to wonder what those were, but like, what I'm saying? But like there was a community for people or, people joining, like there used to be like city leagues and, people would join those. And it was like, he's like, people have stopped gathering in places. And I think some of that goes to the rise of the internet, the ability to be able to connect digitally, but not in person. And so I think the lack of connecting in person has really hindered people as well from learning how to naturally be forced. That was the other thing too. I grew up where we were forced to have to interact with somebody. You know what I mean? You were forced to have to talk to somebody. I just couldn't be on a screen and DM you. Like I had to write a note in school and get somebody to pass it. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I had to go and actually ask you. I couldn't DM you to go to homecoming with me. I had to literally ask you to do that. Like it was just stuff like that. We're like, dude, you were forced.
That's crazy. You really had to think about it.
No, you really had to think about it. Here's the other thing too. And again, you used to have to go. I think back in the day, you would go to a club. And it was like, and dude, you would be in the club and it's like, you're like talking to this one girl all night. You know what I'm saying? Like it wasn't before of like now. People get into relationships with that. It's just like, hey, swipe right, swipe. You know what I'm saying? It's like, you just can, they're doing everything digitally and you don't have to interact with people anymore. So I think that's kind of hurt relationships too, because there's just life circumstances that don't force you to have to do that anymore.
Like I already mentioned, I think you do an incredible job at connecting with people who are even so different mm-hmm. than you. How do you think that your relationship with yourself and how you've developed that over time has more equipped you to have connection with other people?
I think because before, honestly, there would be, especially people who I would deem as like successful or in a certain field or whatever, I would find myself not feeling like I was enough. I feel like, oh man, like I'm, just to be around these people and whatever. And what's interesting, I would come to find out later, some of these people were just like really the same way I felt about them, they felt about me. And what I've learned of becoming more secure and having a greater understanding of who I am is that when I come into a conversation, I used to sometimes, man, I look back on it, I cringe at it, like where I would talk about certain things that maybe I didn't have, enough information on, or I would try to bring the conversation back to something I would, because I was just trying to like, oh no, like I need them to know that I'm cool, like I can actually have this conversation. But now that I've become a little bit, I've become more and more like secure in who I am. It's just like, no, this is just who I am. This is the stuff I know. This is what I'm really passionate about. And like for some people, they're gonna like it. Some people, they're not gonna like it, and that's okay. And here's the other thing of being secure: everyone doesn't need to know how I think about stuff too. That's the other part of it too. The more secure you become, the more you realize like, yeah, people don't need to know. Like even if I have an opposing view with this person, I may like, if they ask me my opinion, they're telling me their opposing view, but if they ask me my opinion, yeah, I'll give it to them. But sometimes I'm like, I'm not going to get into this because why? Because we don't have that deep of relationship. So man, let's keep it cordial and good. And man, we found some common ground on some basic stuff. I'm good with that. I have enough. Here's the other thing. I have enough deep relationships. I don't have to go try to form more. Mm-hmm. I feel like sometimes we feel like we have to fight or argue or man, everybody needs to know my stance. No, they don't. As one of my mentors once says, not everybody needs to know how you feel. It's okay. And I think that actually could help some people have better relationships.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I appreciate about you and Wendy is even though that you yourself have maybe like 4 or 5 like mm-hmm. super deep friendships, mm-hmm. there are also just a lot of people that you would consider close to you that are closer friends that, maybe you talk to twice a year, yep. but you connect over different things. Mm-hmm. And what I found is that and you don't have those relationships for this purpose. But over time, you've been able to really utilize your friendships to connect them with other people that you know, to be able to solve super practical, just like real world issues. And some of that is just incredible because it's also like the friends that you have are also amazing and doing amazing things. How do you think that you fostered those relationships? Because you didn't know that that's what they were going to turn into. You didn't know that this person was going to turn into, you know, this incredible guy.
Yeah. So. Here's what it is because if I can give any bit of knowledge, wisdom that I think is tried and true, I tried my best to treat everyone like I would want to be treated, and I treated everyone as if I didn't need anything from them. I think that would be, if there's any secret to the relationships I have in life, and I can tell you this, there's a lot of things I don't have, a lot of things I lack. The thing I can say with extreme amounts of confidence, like probably arrogance amounts of confidence, I have really good friends and I have really good relationships. And that's, you know, what's crazy, that's not just because, oh my God, I'm just this perfect person. No, I just have always approached relationships with, I don't want anything from you. So some of my friends, like who, you know, two of my really close friends went on to be the third pick and the sixth pick in the NFL draft. The one thing they both will tell you about me is this: when we would go out to eat, like, and everybody else, when you go out and you got guys who are making millions of dollars, no one's ever really reaching for the check. When I would go out to eat with them, I'm always reaching for the check. Because I always wanted them to know, like, I don't want anything from you. I just am your friend. And they have always, always have appreciated that about me. I was always the one there to, man, when things were going, they're difficult, they call me, yeah, man, whatever, what do you need? And I was there to be their friend. And I think that's kind of how I've approached it. And I can tell you that in relationships, if you'll just give and you'll take care of people, I'm telling you, man, people will always take care of you if you take care of people. But my motives really were to take care of people. It wasn't, well, yo, if I take care of this, hey, I know this. A couple years from now, if I need a favor, I'm going to go pull in that favor. See, that's transactional. But I can honestly tell you that's not how I approach relationships. And any relationship, let me be careful, any relationship that I did approach like that never worked out. Oh, I'm going to go meet this person. If I meet this person, it can lead to this. It never worked out. It's always the person who I was just always serving, taking care of, you know, and just being, you know, just kind of, you know, helping them out. The next thing you know, they find themselves, you know, in this executive position and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, and they'll call me like, hey, I need your help with this. Do you mind? And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, whatever I can do. And so that's kind of what it is. I think you have to invest in relationships with no expectation of getting anything.
So you've been pretty open about just generally struggling with feeling misunderstood. And especially, like, you've talked about this a little bit, but it's easy to say that when you're in a room with this person, trying not to prove yourself or do those things that feel like slightly misplaced in a conversation because you're kind of trying to prove who you are, especially when your accolades maybe aren't as traditional or what you believe about the world isn't as traditional. You're approaching things differently. How have you navigated that when it comes to being yourself in a room where you feel like you're going to be misunderstood?
I can tell you that for a while I didn't do that well. I would find myself, and I have enough savvy to where I didn't overdo it, but when I would walk away from a conversation, I would feel like, that wasn't me. Like I was laughing at a joke and I'm like, that joke was dumb. Like, it was just dumb. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it wasn't funny, or you know, or agreeing with a point where I'm like, no, I fundamentally do not agree with that. But it was like, well, because it's who it is and whatever. Over the last, I can honestly tell you, this 5 to 7 years has been this process to now, to where I navigate it to how I'm able to do it now is, if when I'm in a room with people, I have enough evidence. This is the part of getting older. I have enough evidence of how I think and the views of what and kind of the ways I approach things, they work. And And when I say they work for what I'm supposed to do. I think that's where remember I talked about proper expectations. The way I'm called to build or do things is different than someone else. And it doesn't mean my way is better or their way is better. This is just the way for me. But I know that I have evidence and proof that my way works. And so now I don't need to prove to you that it works. The evidence shows that it works. And so I think that's where now of late I've become very confident and very okay with being able to be in a room with whoever it is. Because at the end, like, yeah, it's okay. And then on the other stuff, my race is not their race. My talent is not their talent. And so if you're always comparing people when you walk in a room, that's the one thing when you go to certain rooms and certain things, right? Like, I've been in rooms with entrepreneurs or executives, and you go in a room and you just watch everyone and it just becomes this like comparison thing. And you're just like, it's just, and I'm like, some of the most wealthy, successful people, and you're like, dude, you are so like insecure. It's just ugly. And I don't even like it. So I try, honestly, certain rooms I try not to be in just because I'm like, I don't even like the environment sometimes, but.
I think that sometimes as a culture, we translate being yourself as every environment I'm in needs to line up with who really I am.
Good. Yeah.
So I think what's interesting is you weren't inside of those rooms thinking, this isn't the room for me.
Yeah.
But you were actively thinking about how it is that you show up as who you are in a way that doesn't violate your own conscience. Mm-hmm. How much do you think that, our place of work or our relationships need to reflect our personal values?
I think it's important. But I also think what's deeper and what's more important is that you know what those are and you being secure in that. Because, you hear this thing, right? We talk about this and, it's like, and I get the sentiment, and we even use it sometimes, like the idea of like, we have to bring your full self to work. Well, the problem is that if everyone brings their full self, right, into one moment, there's not any room. Like if you're fully you, I'm fully me, Grady's fully Grady, and there's like 25 other people in this one moment right now, fully being who we are, right? Like, here's the truth about it. As we're recording this, like Grady, who's our producer, Grady's very talkative. Grady is very talented. Grady can rap. Grady can do this. Now, Grady's full self, imagine we're just doing this podcast and Grady like, my full self right now, I got 16 bars to give y'all right now while we're recording. Like, that would be disorderly, right? So Grady works and uses who his personality is behind the camera right now. And my point of why I say that is that I think that you need to be secure in who you are and your values, because when you go to a workplace, I think it should line up to your values for as much best as it can. But sometimes it may not. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't work there. It just means that when you go into that place that you're working in, you don't let say something that may be different than your value allow you to get off course to who you actually are. But you're also secure in who you are to where you're like, I'm okay. Like, I don't have to, this has to be represented out here, right? Like, for example, why I can walk in diverse environments, sometimes people need and I get this because I was this way for a while, where the dominant culture, right? So speaking plainly, like it used to be back in the day, well, if I go somewhere and who's the most powerful white person in the room, can they validate what I'm doing, right? Now I can walk in rooms that could be majority white, they be whatever, because I don't need a white person or a black person or a Latino person to validate who I am. And so I can walk in and fully be me, and realizing that this may not be my way I would do things in my culture. So I can walk into a room of engineers, but I don't know anything about engineering, but I can walk into a room of engineers and be me, and it be the dominant culture and be okay with that. So again, I know it's a little bit everywhere, but I think it should reflect your values, but I also think you should know your values, and those should be fortified in you. And sometimes that can allow you sometimes to be in rooms where you may not have your values are dominated within the environment.
What's so interesting is that we use the word, boundaries a lot.
Yep.
But we're not really willing to accept the boundaries that make us who we are.
That's a good point.
Like the things that kind of make us different than the other person.
Yep.
And so a lot of the times, I think that's what drives the question of are you saying this boundary is important because this boundary is important, or because you want to have the control that you set it.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great point, Bree. I think sometimes people are, I just think people just are very, it goes back to, I said people don't know who they are. And things they think are their values aren't really their values. It's just what it may be popular in culture, what they think somebody else wants to say, or their value comes from a place of pain. You know what I'm saying? And so, like, my value is like, you know, I don't know, like, let's just say, this is may not even be a value, but I'm like, a value of mine, man, is like, I always speak up. All right, well, that's a value of yours because maybe as a child, like, no one let you have a voice. You were suffocated as a child. Well, that may not be, that is maybe like your pain. And I ain't gonna ever be like that again. So, like, this is a value. Like, that's not really a value of yours. You know what I'm saying? What if you just are a mild-mannered person? What if you're a person who doesn't, like, you know, who is just very even keeled because of that? And again, I know I'm jumping to different things, but I think sometimes, yes, I think it's not really people's boundary, their value. I just think it's just sometimes their own pain.
I think to the point of values, it also, in my opinion, this could just be me, my expectation for how my values are mirrored in my working relationships versus how they're mirrored in, like, a marriage, I think are also very different conversations.
Okay.
And I think that the working one is kind of a choice, but a lot of the times there's this expectation, like, you are wrong for not embodying my values in a working relationship, when really it's just like, and then everybody gets anxiety about it because in the working place is like, I'm not wrong. Are we wrong? Like, we need to change everything because I think we might be wrong.
Yeah.
And vice versa. Whereas it's just like, you can just say, like, you know what? We just don't agree on the same things.
Because here's the problem. The problem why that happens is because people in leadership are cowards. They are cowards. They're so afraid to lose people that they won't take a stand on anything. And they're afraid, and this is the thing, they're afraid to be canceled. The reason why cancel culture actually why cancel culture exists is because there's oxygen for cancel culture. Cancel culture wouldn't exist if there wasn't oxygen for it. So everyone gets so afraid of being canceled because why? We could lose all these things. Well, then, okay, then you care. So then you'll be like, well, you know, because that's why I can't say when people start talking about cancel culture, then I'm like, no, big dog. Like, if going against cancel culture is your thing, then be afraid to lose everything. But it's really not. It's your money. It's your company's reputation. It's all this stuff that you're afraid to. Well, we don't want to say this because we'll get canceled. So let's just placate the people. And I think it's just wrong. Now, I'm not saying that people who there are some people who just go fully into, like, their whole job to cancel people. I think they're stupid too. But the point is, I think so many times, like what you're saying, when it comes to a value, it's because, like, yeah, we can agree to disagree on, like, you know, what your value is versus what my value is. And can we find some common ground in there? Because that's actually how you walk together in a relationship. That's another thing in a relationship is compromise. It's the idea that, man, all right, this is a value for you and this is a value for me. And what if our values actually are, like, they're opposite of each other? So then how do we decide to, like, actually walk together? And I think that's really important. You know, I have people who I do things with who don't have the value I have when it comes to faith, for example. But I'm able to do really cool stuff with them because we find value in other stuff. We find value in maybe impacting our city together. We see a need in our city, man, we need to go after that. So that's what we unite on, that, not what we don't unite on. And we can do that. And I think that's what it comes down to, is that really good relationships, you're willing to have compromise.
How do you feel like your relationship with your children have shaped your work?
I think it's shaped it a lot because I've learned a lot from them. I've learned a lot of who I am. I've learned some of my own brokenness because I'm with them all the time. I've been able to see where my insecurities come out in my parenting, or how my worry comes out. And so that makes me go deeper dive internally of why is that happening. So then that helps me as I'm working with them. I also think too, working with my kids and being around my kids, man, I've learned a lot about people. You mean like my son Jalen? Like the one thing about him is, dude, he just really, and you know this about him, like he just sees the best in people. Like he really just sees the world, like kind of like he can bounce back. You know what I'm saying? Like you can have the toughest conversation with him, and you to be at odds, and then it's like the next day, it's just like, yeah, everything's great, you know. And it's like, and what I've learned working with Jalen is that, man, the ability to like move on, you know what I'm saying, to be able to move on and to be able to say, no, man, like, okay, yeah, this is something that happened, but we're good now. Did we deal with it? Okay, cool, let's keep it going. I think I've learned a lot of learning how to like to forgive and move past certain things, actually being with them. So I've learned a lot with my kids.
How would you say, or how would you define family? Mm-hmm. And how important do you think that it is in the workplace? Because that's kind of become like this taboo. Like if you go to a workplace and someone says like, we're like a family here, you're kind of like,
you're like, yeah.
I'm going to go to my next interview.
Yeah. I'll define family. Now, again, I think when we're talking about it in this way, you know, again, when you're talking about like actual blood related, okay, that's one way to define family. But even beyond that, I actually think family are people who, like, you know, you're willing to like sacrifice with, suffer with, head in a direction together with. I think those things, I think, man, are you willing to sacrifice for someone? You know, I consider you family. Why? Because I think we sacrifice. I think we suffer through things. I think we're heading somewhere together. Aww. On mission and stuff like that. So I think that's where I think you're family. You know what I'm saying? I think I have friends of mine that they're my family. Like I consider them as close as, I mean, they're probably closer to me than a lot of majority of my blood relatives, because we sacrifice, we suffer together, we're going somewhere together. And so that's where I kind of consider family. And I think when it comes to a workplace environment, I think that in a workplace environment, when we think of family, people do that. It's then if you're going to use that word, then you have to use that word. And you know what you do when someone's going through something within a family that's a real need. Let's just say all of a sudden you have somebody who's working, you know, for you. And let's just say that, man, they are experiencing some real hardship and suffering. Maybe it's postpartum depression. Maybe, let's just use that. Let's use postpartum depression. Well, they only have, you know, let's say 8 weeks off. Well, family would say, man, you would begin to say, okay, man, how do this person's a really key part to what we're doing. And this person's heart, because this is the other part of it too. If someone's trying to abuse it, say, oh, I expect you to do this for me. See, that's the other thing about family. The real healthy family doesn't expect stuff from you. They don't tell you better do this, or that's sometimes in working relationships. Sometimes like people, you know, corporations will say, oh, we're family. And then the employee will be like, okay, yeah, but it ends up being on one side of the street on both, you know, either the employer or the employee side. I think if there's an employee who's like going through postpartum depression and they're wanting to get back to work, but they're really struggling. I think family is like, man, what can we do to really assist and help them? And you know what that means? That may mean, man, extra funds to, man, get them, man, maybe the therapy, whatever they need to really work through that. Man, are we willing to give them some more time to work through this before they come back to work? Are we willing to be hybrid with them for maybe, you know, for a month or 6 or 8 weeks, and then let's come back and evaluate that? I think family is like when someone's struggling, you surround that person. You know what I'm saying? And so I think those are just kind of ways. I think sometimes we just throw family out there because it's a buzzword. It makes people think, that makes people feel good, but people see through that. Family is not what you say. Family you feel, right? Family is not something you say. You feel family. That's why when you know around somebody, oh no, this is just family.
I think that sometimes in both the employer and the employee relationship, there is this fear to know each other beyond the job description, because what are you going to do with this information that I know? And then sometimes as a leader, it's like, what do I do with the information that I know? How do I hold the standard while navigating personal circumstances and showing you that I love and care about you? But also, like, I pay you to do a job. And also I think that there are some cases where that's true on the employee side too. Like there's a struggle to really be like seen or known or whatever in a professional setting. How do you think that we can better navigate those kind of nuances?
Yeah, I think how you can navigate that is when you're able to come to the table, both parties are able to really approach it of like, man, like we talked about earlier, what can I give? You know what I mean? Like, what can I give to this workplace, or what can my employer, what can we give to them? I think when the problem happens is when both parties are now expecting things versus saying, no, man, how do I give more? Like this whole conversation right now about like, and I get it. And be really careful. I get why people are saying this now. The idea of like, man, if you only work 8 to 5, you only work for the hours you're contracted to work in, because it's a response, and a rightful response, from employers like overdoing it. And it was an employer market. Now it's an employee market. Now the pendulum's going the other way. And I think that part is wrong as well. To where it's like, well, if I'm not doing this, then I'm only going to do this, what I'm contracted to do. That's cool. Totally fine. Respect that. But then you can't be mad if the person who is actually willing to do that gets a promotion more than you do, quicker than you do. You can't be mad at that. Like, they're willing to go the extra mile. You know what I'm saying? And like, that's where, again, some people don't like that. They think that's wrong. I don't think it's wrong. I think that this is just what it is. And I think it's both. It's a two-way street. So I think that a great employer-employee relationship is two people coming and saying, man, we have a common goal and we just want to accomplish that common goal. And we're willing to sacrifice and give. Any healthy relationship, there's compromise and sacrifice.
Okay. Well, in honor of Valentine's Day approaching,
oh boy,
what's your opinion on the current dating landscape, and how do you think that it's going to impact society?
First of all, I am so thankful I am married. I've been married for a long time. Boy, listen, them streets are rough. I want you to know, you know what I'm saying? For you, Bree, and all that, my heart goes out. Them streets are very rough right now. I think it's really, I think it's a very problematic area. And I think it's something that as a society, we need to really start putting some real thought to it, because I think there's so many factors into this. This is a thick problem. So it has to have a thick solution. It's not just simple. So people will say, oh, it's dating apps. Like, no, that's not it. You know what I'm saying? Or it's the fact of, people say, oh, it's because of like, the Me Too movement and, women's liberation and women haven't, then that'll be like, the other side of it, and they'll blame women for it, or it's such a complex thing. And I think one of the biggest issues is that the number one thing I would think is that we have now lived in a society where everyone is trying to limit the pain they feel. And relationships and romantic relationships are painful. Marriage is painful. It is the building together of two people who have come together to try to build a life together with different family trees, different way they see the world, and that becomes a clash. And in that clash, it is just like, man, the willing to forgive and to compromise, the willing to have long conversations, the willing to think the best of someone. That's freaking hard emotional work to do. And most people don't want to do that work. They want to just kind of have it easy. So that is why, man, it is easier to just swipe and just have kind of a physical relationship with no of the other emotional ties. But we all know, and I believe this, well, say we all know, but like a relationship is not just a physical thing. You know what I'm saying? When there's a physical activity, when people have sex with one another, like, listen, it is more than a physical body. I believe we're made up of body, soul, and spirit. I believe there's something that is like spiritual that happens in that. And that is why, people say, well, we just hook up. I'm like, no, it's not that. That's why people, then they go on podcasts and, well, it's just a physical thing, but then they're roasting, getting all their bitterness out and their pain. I'm like, no, dude, like it's more than that. And so I said a lot to say, I think it's a very tough landscape. I think dudes don't want to take responsibility. I think people don't want to feel pain. I think women are, they are, there's not a ton, you know what I'm saying? I mean, there are a lot of statistics out there right now that talk about, like, even on dating apps that, like, if you're like in the top 5% or 10% of like the way of like a guy, like if it's a job, height, whatever, like you're picking from 90% of the women, you know what I'm saying? If you're a dude who's like below, I don't know if it's 6'2" or whatever, you're like, yeah, dude, you're pretty like crap out of luck right now with the people you can choose from. And women don't have a bunch of options. You know what I'm saying? Dudes aren't going to school as much anymore. So it's like women look for dudes who are educated, and guys aren't going to. I mean, it's just so much. But I also will bring it down to the basement, is I don't think people have proper expectations of relationships. We want everything to be pain-free. And it's just freaking hard. And when it becomes hard, that's when they begin to like separate from relationship.
I think knowing, if we keep in mind that everything that you just said is true,
yep.
What do you think is the most helpful thing that women can do for men and men could do for women?
I think what I said from the first question you asked me, I think a willingness to sacrifice for one another, to think the best of one another, until there's evidence that tells you something different. But the first thing is, I think, coming into a relationship saying, hey, what can I give, not what can I get? I think that's where it has to be, where both parties are willing to do that. And I think right now, both parties are not willing to do that. I would think at times, honestly, women are probably more willing to do that. But I think that, men aren't willing to do that. And I think, there's a lot of women who aren't willing to do that. So I think that's the number one thing. Are you willing to walk into a relationship saying, man, what can I do to give my very best? And that doesn't mean you get trampled on. That doesn't mean that you're like, man, like you're a doormat. That's not in any way what I'm talking about. I'm talking about having a healthy sense of self. Matter of fact, sacrificing and bringing you. And some of that is the healthy version of you, where you're like, no, I have a boundary here, or I have a standard here. Nope. Me giving the very best of you is me keeping my standard. Me not letting you just talk to me however you want to talk to me. That's actually me bringing my very best to you. So I think that that's what I mean by being able to do that.
Since there's starting to be a little bit more of a gap between the capacity of women as a whole and the capacity of men as a whole, obviously we're talking younger, and this is like very generic,
yep.
Statements that we're making, but generally. And then there's also always that conversation for women that are like, I don't want to settle. Like, Like, what is your opinion on that?
Sometimes I think women are waiting for like, they are.
God.
Grady's right.
Yeah,
Grady just said that. He's
exactly.
Right. It really is. I think we're waiting. And then, because here's what I think it's arrogance. Because I'm like, who do you think you are?
Right.
I don't want to settle. There's a bunch of dudes like, I don't want to settle with you. Like what? Like that's why
I'm that good.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't think a lot of women like say that. Like I don't hear them saying like, man, like I need to make sure I get myself in order. It's always about dudes like, well, I'm going to settle for him. Like, dude, like, what are you doing? Okay, because let me tell you this: if you're like that, then like, you know what? There would be a ton of people, unless you're in a season of your life where you're saying, no, I'm not even trying to be in a relationship. That's a whole different ballgame. But the people who say that, it drives me nuts, because I'm like, well, who are you to say that? I'm not trying to settle. I'm like, okay, well, you know what? You want to be in a relationship, then you'll just be alone. And I understand the sentiment behind it, because it's like, well, if I settle for this, but then I'm like, okay, well, what are your standards? When you talk about settling, like, is it realistic? Like, is it realistic what you're actually doing? Because let me tell you this, if you're expecting certain things, like life is about maturity, growth, evolution. And so let me tell you, if Wendy, who I am today versus who I was when I first got, yes, I am way better. And I'm super thankful that in this marriage, that man, she's been willing to grow with me and allow me to grow, to mature. I was an idiot. There was moments where I've not been great, and then there's moments I've been, but I'm way better. And same thing for her. She's really grown and matured, and this is just the evolution of it. But a lot of times, women, and I want to say this, I think women and men both, you want a finished product. You don't get the finished product. You got to walk with that person and help them, because together you work yourself into the finished product. But a lot of times we want a finished product and we just want it to magically happen. Well, that's just not going to be the case. And so I just would ask people out there talking about you're settling, then are your standards unrealistic? And I think a lot of times I hear people talk about their standards. I'm like, you're an idiot. Your standards are just don't make any sense. I'm watching something one day and my husband's got to make $200,000 and da 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 da. And I'm like, first of all, Susie, you, I don't think you're in the top 1% in our country if you make over 400 grand. So you're trying to, so now it's okay, well, let's not drop it to 200. Let's say it's the top 5%. So you're looking for the top 5% of men. And again, I'm throwing out very random numbers. I think it's 400,000 definitely for the 1%. But here's the deal. But in this other, you're looking for 5%. There are more women than there are men. Your pool has then shrunk. And then, so that's just one thing. Got to make $200,000. Then he's got to be 6'2". Got to be over 6 foot. Can't have a short king. All right, cool. All right, so now
until that recent Calvin Klein ad of chef.
Yeah, dude. I know everybody's
short kings are in.
Dude, I know. I literally saw somebody on my story, somebody who I know. They literally had that Calvin Klein picture of him up, and it was on their story. She was like, "This is my king. This is my David." From Michelangelo's David. This is my David. I was like, "Hey, yo."
So funny.
I was like, "Hey,
wait, I need you to tell me who said that.
I will tell you afterwards.
Hilarious. I want to be their friend. That's so funny.
And anyways. So, but a lot of people, man, oh, well, he has to be this height. Okay, cool. Then you start getting some people, well, then he has to be he has to be ethnic. Okay. And then I'm like, you're talking about, I can't sell. I'm like, you're, again, as Grady said, you're trying to find God. And it's just, and then you have this arrogance. And I'm just kind of like, all right, well, good luck. You'll just be alone waiting for somebody. And then you're just, well, I didn't settle. I think it's just, I could talk about this all day because I think people are just so, and what they don't want to deal with is their own brokenness. They don't want, because a lot of times I think when people say that they're not trying to settle because you think you deserve, and you think you deserve a certain thing, and this person's going to actually complete you. And this person's going to make you. So they got to look this way, make this much money, because it actually shows people that I am someone. Because I married someone who's 6'5", who makes over $200,000, who looks like, you know what I'm saying, they're Hispanic and black and Indian, and they look like a freaking model. And so when I go home and my friends see me on IG or on TikTok with him, well, oh, look, I just wasn't the person. I didn't marry somebody who this, because now I'm showing the world I am somebody. I'm like, dude, that's out of your insecurity, not the other person. Sorry.
Sometimes I feel like when people say that, it's kind of the abdication of responsibility of well, nobody else is good enough, and that makes me feel better about the possibility of maybe I'm not good enough.
Dude, preach, Bree. It is. It's dude, it really is that, because I don't even want to add to that. I think you're 100% right.
I'm always but the thing that gets me though is I'm like, if you don't want to hang out with yourself, why does anybody want to hang out with you? If you don't like you, well, I hate to tell you, but this person isn't going to make that any better.
Listen, I love being by myself. Right. Love being by myself. If you don't love being by yourself, there's something wrong. And then you want somebody else to be with you. If you should love one person, it should be yourself. You should be I get there's things we have to work through. Please hear me on that. But at some point in time, you gotta get to a place I like me. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And it's like at some point, if you're never okay with you, then like you're right. What was somebody? Then you gotta put somebody else to suffer. Like you won't even suffer with yourself. You want somebody else to do it.
I know,
That's
because
wild.
now it's like, well, they're already having to dance with your issues, and now they're having to dance with the self-deprecation too.
Dude, let me tell you this, man. Hey,
Anyways,
as Taylor Tomlinson said, don't use somebody as your floaties.
He's not your arm floaties.
He is not your arm floaty. His name is Ken.
But I think no, but I think that in that wonderful analogy though, it's kind of like they need somebody who's good enough to be the arm floaties.
Yep.
And most people like genuinely just don't have that kind of capacity. Mm-hmm. So I think in some sense it's like I'm trying to find the perfect person who will be able to like dance with all of my issues to make me feel better, and that's just not. Even if you think you found it, you're gonna find out.
Because
really
my question would be, okay, well, that's fine. You want somebody, well, I need them to do this and to have all this stuff, and then to be able to deal with my up and down, whatever. Okay, well, are you willing to then deal with their up and down? Have you ever asked yourself, am I the person that could deal with somebody who emotionally is like me? Could I deal with that? Because, like, honestly, everybody has issues. Like, I want to be really clear for you if you don't believe anything I've said on this podcast, believe this. Every person has issues, and every person will bring those issues into a relationship. And so if you can't deal with issues, then do not be in a relationship. There is this false expectation that people are going to come into that we think of the very best of relationships where everyone is just, man, they're great, I'm great, they're emotionally healthy, they're healthy, they've been to therapy, I've been to therapy, they know their stuff, I know my stuff, and it's all going to be great. And it's a false expectation. You got to be able to handle crap. Like, you know what I'm saying? That's why I appreciate Wendy, because at the end of the day, she's been married to someone who has struggled with mental health. She's been married to someone who has very high highs, very low lows. That is something where, man, and she's had to be someone who's had to walk with that, had to walk with someone like me. And in that, I know that's difficult, and I know that's been hard. And then the other side of it, there's things with her I've had to walk with for us knowing each other for 25 years. But that is what it's about. And I can tell you, I'm a better man because of it. And I believe she's a better woman because of it. Because that is actually how you mature and grow in life. And so I just think sometimes you got to look and say, what are you expecting from a relationship? Mm-hmm. Hey guys, I hope today was helpful for you. And again, we talk and there's so much complexity. I hope what you hear if there's certain things I say, there's a lot of complexity that goes to this. I know sometimes we can make things very simple, but we don't have, 25 hours to do a podcast. We're not, it's not the Joe Rogan experience, and people aren't paying us $100 million to talk as long as we want to talk. But we can't always hit every angle to every conversation. But what I hope you hear more than anything in what we communicate is reality. Is to be what we want to be on this podcast is like, at times like cold water that gets thrown on your face to like wake you up, to make you face reality. Because I believe when you can face reality, not this false hope, you can really live authentic. I believe people don't face reality. So when you don't face reality, you live a false life. You don't live in reality. But if you know what reality is, you can actually live an authentic life. But a lot of times to live an authentic life, you have to live in reality. And so that's what we want to do. So even talking about relationships today, our best is to talk about this is just actually reality. And how do you actually do that, build that? And so we hope it was helpful. If there's questions, comments, things like that, man, make sure you share. May disagree with what we say. We're totally cool with that. And so until next time, keep writing new rules.